A war against ideas, a sad day for free speech, an affront on global communication. This is how a recent EU banning of Iranian media outlets has been described. I'm Homa Lezgi, and on this edition of News Analysis, I'm asking what led the European Union to ban 19 Iranian TV channels and radio stations, and what will the consequences be?
On Monday, European satellite provider Eutelsat SA stopped the broadcast of several Iranian satellite channels and radio stations on order of the European Commission. It is ironic that the decision came just a few days after the European Union was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The European Union's recent decision to take 19 Iranian TV and radio stations off the air is being viewed as a violation of the most basic human rights.
Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers.
It's definitely infringing upon the free speech rights of the Iranian people and of the right of the European people to have more alternate news available to them.
Ironically enough, the European Union, which has been trying to portray itself as an advocate of free speech, has given a muted response to caricatures published in a number of EU member states that insulted the Holy Prophet of Islam. Some analysts believe political motives are behind Europe's decision to ban the Iranian channels.
Well, I think the reasoning here is, first of all, political. It has nothing to do with the content of the channels. By doing that, you impose a monopoly of information.
Others say the ban on Iranian media outlets is an attempt to undermine their increasing popularity.
These stations, particularly Press TV, have gained credence in Europe from people who are rejecting austerity, rejecting this constant state of war, and are looking for an alternative outlook on what is happening in the world. In the EU, unelected European Commission, maybe, we don't know yet, or the European Council, which is made up of government ministers, free from any democratic control, have taken these channels off because actually they're growing in popularity in certain cases in Europe itself.
Iranian TV channels have condemned the move as an unjustified violation of the right to free speech. They say they're paying the price for broadcasting news from an alternative viewpoint. Some critics believe the move should as well raise the alarm for other critical voices in Europe.
And if they can do it to 19 Iranian news outlets, the European Union might be thinking of doing it to other news outlets in Europe, which are radical and critical themselves, because they do not want radical, critical voices at a time of austerity when the EU is waging an economic war and social war on its own population.
Well, joining me now live from Washington is author and historian Dr. Webster Tarpley. I'd also like to welcome Director of the Bruges Group with us from London, Mr. Robert Oulds, and also Senior Editor of Veterans Today, Gordon Duff, with us via Skype from Ohio. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. My first question to our guest in Washington, Dr. Tarpley. First of all, what do you think about the reason cited by Eutelsat for this decision? And that is, of course, the extended sanctions by the European Union.
Well, I think that's a pretext. And I think that the alarming thing about what the European Commission has done is that this may be a pre-war move. It is of the kind of military preparations that might precede some attempt to start a wider war in the Middle East. If we think back, when NATO was about to attack Libya, they began interfering with the Libyan state television. They began inserting their own fake programs, brainwashing programs, disinformation programs. We also have followed in quite a bit of detail back in July, around the 15th to the 20th of July of this year, when NATO attempted to overthrow the government of Syria with a kind of shock and awe, a series of converging deployments. One of the things they did was to purge the pro-Assad Syrian state media off of Arabsat and Nilesat and insert CIA programming and so forth. So it seems to me that there's a war on to get control of these satellites with the view that if you control them, it becomes easier to peddle your own versions of events. In particular, suppose we have a false flag event in the near future. NATO specializes, the U.S. specializes in false flag events. If you're going to have a false flag event, it's great advantage to be able to control an alternative source of opinion going into Europe, which these Iranian media could be relied on to provide. So it may be pre-war.
So a pretext there, you're saying, and possibly a pre-war move. Gordon Duff now in Ohio, you've said in a piece that you've written about this that the reason given, that is sanctions, is a lie. Tell us what you mean by that, and also if you agree that this could be a pre-war move.
Well, my impression, and we did a strong background check on the decision-making, where the origins of this came from, and it came from the company of Eutelsat. This is essentially a unilateral decision made by a Michel de Rosen, an Israeli citizen that controls Eutelsat, an Israeli-owned company that runs about 25% of the news programs in the world. And it's not a unique situation here in the U.S. Israeli companies control all of our mobile telephone billing. Many of our mobile telephone providers, they handle almost all security information for the United States government, which of course is sold around the world. This decision is essentially one passed down from Tel Aviv through surrogates inside Europe. And Eutelsat, of course, is there are many providers that could have blocked Press TV. Eutelsat in particular is a Mossad operation, has always been a Mossad propaganda operation. And the idea that the United States unilaterally is pushing toward war toward Iran is not true. We have a very clear differentiation in the U.S. between two political candidates, one entirely financed by organized crime and the State of Israel, Sheldon Adelson, the Koch brothers, and another one that's deeply opposed to war with Iran, and that's President Obama. And hiding that fact from the people of the world is important to many people, including a lot of would-be activists.
Right. So here you're calling this a Mossad operation against Iran and not just a unilateral move from Europe or the US. Now, let's just go to London. Robert Oulds now. Mr. Oulds, I'm going to refer to a WikiLeaks cable that was published earlier on revealing how the British Foreign Office told an American diplomat back in 2010 that the government was, quote, exploring ways to limit the operations of Press TV, among others. Now, the department had warned that the UK department, that is, had warned America that UK law sets a very high standard for denying licenses to broadcasters, and that licenses can only be denied in cases where national security is threatened or if granting a license would be contrary to Britain's obligations under international law. And it said that then neither of those standards had been met with respect to Press TV, but it said if further sanctions are imposed on Iran, a case may be able to be made, rather, on this second option. So do you think that this is a continuation of that plan, and would you call it part of an operation or pre-planned?
Well, the European Union does not like dissent. It does not like alternative viewpoints being expressed. The European Union and the European Commission, which has put this measure through, we must remember, is unelected and it is unaccountable. It is not a democratic organisation, and they do not like the alternative viewpoints which have been put on Press TV, which has exposed the failures of the euro, the failure of the EU austerity programme, which cannot work so long as the single currency, the euro, exists, and the economic harm that this is causing. And there's a whole wave of dissent which is going on in Europe, and the European Union does not want this highlighted. So I think that is a major factor. And of course, yes, there has been a process of many different countries not liking what has been put up on Press TV. But of course, that does go against the principle of free speech. And who is to decide what others cannot say? Who is to decide what people must think and what is acceptable? It is not really acceptable, in my opinion, that people who are unaccountable and unelected are judging for other people what we should be able to listen to and what should be said on the airwaves. That, in my opinion, is completely wrong. And of course, it doesn't help people coming together. It doesn't help nations to come and understand each other's point of views if that is being, if the airwaves are being denied to one group of people who might just happen to have a different point of view. Yes, some people might not agree, but of course we need to have different opinions aired. But there is certainly a strategy within the European Union to isolate alternative viewpoints, and the removal of the licenses for satellite broadcasting for press TV, as well as perhaps other Iranian channels as well, is of course part of that strategy. We've seen the EU's contempt for democracy before, and we'll continue to see it again, and I think this is another prime example of that.
So a question you raised here, Mr. Olds, who has the authority, who has the right to decide who can watch what? Basically the attack that's been said is happening against free speech. Dr. Tarpley, when we look at why this decision was made in the first place, a lot of questions are raised on how this is backfiring on the European Union as a whole. Do you think that despite the fact that the Europeans knew that this is going to backfire even from people inside of Europe and elsewhere, that they made this decision anyhow? Why did they make this decision, do you think?
As I say, it seems to me that it is a pre-war step, or it may be a pre-war step. It may be the preparation for a false flag event. I would warn against simplistic and reductionist monocausal interpretations of this. Let's look at who actually is behind it. The impulse comes from the European Commission. Here we have the Portuguese neo-fascist Barroso. He comes out of the Salazar party. And then we know that this has been preceded by a period of British interference, right? The British busily jamming and otherwise harassing these Iranian broadcasters. Well, that would lead us then to Hague of the Foreign Office. At the UN, he was one of the most aggressive on Syria in the past session. So we may be looking at a preparation for something that is in the form of an attack on Syria. I don't see how anybody could say Obama's against the war with Iran. He just is actually waging a war on Syria. This makes no sense. The other thing, though, is the Conseil supérieur de l'audiovisuel. Pity the poor French. They used to be under the control of the Committee of Public Safety and Robespierre and his reign of terror. Now we have this obscure committee with faceless, nameless bureaucrats who dictate the opinion to 55 million Frenchmen. Not a good situation. I would look at French Foreign Minister Fabius, who has also been extremely aggressive. Probably the most raving speeches on Syria have been coming from him. Don't forget Baroness Ashton, also at the European Commission, the Foreign Affairs Director there. So it seems to me that there's an agreement among these people, many of them linked to the Bilderberger Group or other institutions that we want to keep in mind, that something may now happen in the Middle East. It's simply a warning that could occur more or less at any time.
Right. Your response to that, Mr. Gordon Duff, what Mr. Tarpley was saying there about those behind this move, would you agree?
No, not at all, actually. Mr. Tarpley has just conjugated the Israeli lobby in the EU, managing to ascribe all of their efforts to other purposes. He's managed to mischaracterize the political situation in the United States through what appears to be a purposeful deflection. His opinions I respect. I've respected his body of work certainly for many years. He's an excellent scholar. But the issue here of war is that the U.S. has no interest at all in a war with Iran, no military capability of such a war. Our current government is absolutely aware. General Dempsey has spoken against war. Secretary of Defense Panetta has. Our most belligerent talk in the U.S. has come from Secretary Clinton and has been very suspicious. But the election in the U.S. is clearly over two things. Romney represents war with Iran, and Obama represents a peaceful solution that will reflect very much almost the identical words we hear from Vladimir Putin. And as far as our speaker from the UK, I would remind him that all of the news on the failures of the EU is in every American newspaper every day. We read nothing about except the bankruptcy of the Spanish banks, the bankruptcy of the EU, the failure of the EU, the breakup of the EU. It's in every paper, every network in the United States every day, all day long. Europe, years living there, it's a Disneyland of ignorance, and I have no respect for the European media whatsoever.
Right, our guest in London, Robert Oulds, I know you're going to respond to that, but also tell us why you think up until now the European Union, Europe as a whole, has remained silent about this criticism that has arisen as a result of its decision. We're not hearing any kind of response to the claims that it's disrespecting free speech, for instance.
Well, the European Union does not care about free speech. We've seen that before, and it doesn't care about a democratic mandate. The European Union, when there has been referendums that have voted against its policies, when there's been various treaties which have gathered more power to the unelected and unaccountable European Commission, have ignored that and pushed the treaties through and the measures through which take more power, even though the people of many different European states had spoken up and in referenda actually legally voted those measures down. We can say that we can safely say that the European Union has a contempt for democracy and a contempt for public opinion, which it just dismisses as being populist, and it has one agenda, and that's the amassing of more power to its own institutions. We can be certain of that. And I would argue that this is part of that process. Yes, there may well be other motives involved as well, but the fact of banning satellite broadcasting from one particular group of stations is in a problem which is manifestly at the heart of the European Union's and its attitude. Not everybody would take that approach, even though they may not necessarily agree with what's on Press TV. But if we are to have an honest and open media, then we should have a more liberal situation which allows different viewpoints to be expressed. But the European Union clearly has contempt for that, and I firmly argue that this is an example of that.
Right. Dr. Tarpley, one of the analysts that we were speaking to earlier was telling us that this is not just about the West's confrontation with Iran, but it's also about the European Union's opposition towards the European people or the Western people themselves, because they don't want the European people to view that part of the news the way that the alternative media put it out to them. Do you think this is also about the measures that are being taken against the people? They're concerning, of course, the social unrest we're seeing in Europe, the Occupy movement, etc.
Well, I consider the European idea as it existed in the first decades to be a worthwhile one. But we have to face the fact that the people who now run the European Commission are totalitarian neoliberals. Totalitarian, we see that they want to have an opinion dictatorship, and neoliberals in the sense that they espouse the economics of the financier oligarchy of the 1%. We have to think about the irony of the European Union trying to give lessons about human rights to anybody when we have the Greek reactionary government with their savage, brutal austerity program, and we have the Spanish neo-fascist government with their program of genocidal austerity. Everybody's economic rights are being trampled on due to the fact that the zombie bankers of Europe currently control the institutions of the European Union. But I think the immediate focus is it's October, and it's time for an October surprise. We've got these US elections. We've already had one October surprise. That was in Libya, staged, as far as I can see, by the CIA Mormon mafia. And we might get, and they were in favor of Romney to be sure, but we might get another one. And we're getting into the time of October when the effect of something big, something like an attack on Syria, a false flag involving Syria, might generate the rally round effect. In other words, it might help Obama. And naturally, that has to be taken into account. So we're in a very dangerous geometry as we go towards the end of October.
Right, and we're just running out of time quickly, so the last minutes of the programme, your concluding comments in Ohio, Gordon Duff. When we look at the consequences of this move, a lot of people have been saying that it is actually going to lead people to start watching the channels that have been banned just to see what they've been showing and why they've been banned. But what are the consequences going to be for the EU and what will this move lead to? Do you think that this is just a start of more moves against Iran?
I believe that the EU, we know to have almost no military capability. We, in the U.S., those of us who work within the military, I'm a military contractor, we look on all of the military forces of the EU as almost humorous. The German army is laughable. The British military is considered laughable at best. The Canadian, which I count with the EU. The French even more so. They run out of fuel, they run out of bombs. They're using technology 30 to 40 years behind ours. The issues here, as far as Dr. Tarpley had mentioned about the CIA and Mormon Mafia, we definitely have one. The Mormon Mafia, or the people around Mr. Romney, are tied to the Bush family. The Bush family is aligned to a cabal that includes the 1%, the European bankers, groups that are called Zionist, a very dangerous term to use, and that we're managing to channel this from, it's a very wide group of people here. That 1% is a very diverse group that is dictating the destruction of all of us.
And our guest in London, quickly if you can, Mr. Oates, do you think that this is actually a sign of strength by the EU in its confrontation with Iran, or a sign of its weakness? Does it show that they're at their wits' ends and they're making this decision, or that this is just the start of further operations?
It's a sign of cowardice, and that is a sign of weakness. To actually ban what other people have to say, that shows that they're actually afraid. And that, in my view, is pathetic as well as being contemptible. What we need to remember about the European Commission is that it's deeply corrupt. It has a budget, and of course its accounts haven't been legally signed off in 17 years because it's riddled with fraud and corruption. The waste is massive as well, but we don't know where a lot of the money goes. There's a great deal of problems with the European Commission. It's not just undemocratic and unelectable, it is also corrupt. And of course, follow the money, and I'm sure ultimately we'll find the answers to many EU policies and why they do what they do.
In London, Robert Oates, Director of the Bruges Group, joining us there. Thank you very much. A big thank you also to our guest in Ohio, Senior Editor of Veterans Today, Gordon Duff, and with us from Washington, author and historian Dr. Webster Tarpley. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts with us. And that's all the time we have for this edition of News Analysis. From me, Homa Lesgi, and the rest of the team, goodbye.